Alex woke up with the soft warmth of sunlight filtering through the blinds. It was a normal morning, nothing extraordinary. His apartment, cozy and familiar, smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee. His bed, soft and inviting, held the comfort of routine, but there was something about today that felt different. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and reached for his phone. A message from Sarah, his girlfriend, popped up on the screen. "Good morning, love. I made you breakfast. Come down when you're ready." The text was so ordinary, so normal, yet a shiver ran down Alex's spine. Why did it feel distant? He couldn't place it, but something about the way Sarah had written that message felt off. It was like a subtle change in the way her words landed on his mind. "Come down when you're ready." He couldn't remember her ever phrasing it that way. Brushing the thought aside, he shook his head, trying to shake the creeping sense of unease. He'd been under a lot of stress at work lately. Maybe it was just exhaustion. With a sigh, Alex got up, threw on a shirt, and walked downstairs to the kitchen where Sarah was standing by the stove, humming quietly to herself. "Morning," he said, forcing a smile. She turned to him, her smile as warm as always. But her eyes, something about them seemed distant, like she wasn't really there. "Morning, babe. I made pancakes." Her voice was soothing, comforting even. Yet Alex couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hiding behind it. He sat down at the table, trying to ignore the gnawing discomfort in his chest. As Sarah set the pancakes down in front of him, he noticed something strange. The picture frame on the wall, the one of them on their vacation to the beach last summer, it had shifted. He was sure the photo used to be on the left side of the living room, but now it hung on the right, directly opposite him. He stared at it for a moment too long, then quickly looked away. "Maybe I just forgot." But it wasn't just that. There was the faintest of cracks in the frame, a flaw he was certain hadn't been there before. He stared at it, trying to remember how it had been placed, but his mind felt clouded. "Are you okay, Alex?" Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. "Yeah, just tired," he said, forcing a smile. "I must be getting sick or something." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Instead, she sat down across from him, her smile returning. They ate in silence, and Alex tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that his mind was just playing tricks on him. The day carried on in a similar fashion. At work, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He found himself staring at his computer screen, zoning out, thinking about the smallest details of his life that no longer seemed to match his memory. A conversation he had with his boss yesterday. Had they discussed the new project or not? He couldn't remember the words, just the feeling of being told something important, but nothing concrete. As he walked out of the office building at the end of the day, Alex passed a street corner he'd walked down 1,000 times before. But today, everything seemed strange. The buildings looked different. The streetlights flickered like they hadn't in years, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. He stopped, blinking in confusion. This isn't right. But before he could linger on it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "I'm at the store. I'll be back soon. I was thinking we could watch that movie tonight." Alex stared at the message for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. "We watched a movie last night, didn't we?" The memories were fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream that was slipping away. He shook his head, trying to push the thought aside. He needed to get home. When Alex returned to the apartment, Sarah wasn't there yet. He threw his keys on the counter and wandered into the living room. The picture frame from this morning, it was still on the right side of the room, but now it looked even more out of place. Something about it was unsettling, as though the image of the two of them at the beach had been altered. He could have sworn he remembered the ocean being brighter in the photo, the sand whiter. But now, everything seemed darker. His heart raced. He was starting to feel dizzy, the room spinning around him. He gripped the edge of the couch to steady himself and then froze. A faint sound echoed in the hallway behind him. Sarah's voice, whispering something under her breath. But it wasn't quite right. The tone wasn't the same, and the words sounded strange, as if they weren't meant for him at all. His mind raced as he turned toward the hallway. Sarah? No answer. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling weak, and walked toward the hallway. The apartment was eerily silent. When he reached the end of the hall, he stopped. The door to the bedroom was open, but Sarah wasn't there. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Then his eyes fell on something he hadn't noticed before. On the floor next to the bed, a small black notebook lay open, its pages filled with handwriting he didn't recognize. His heart skipped a beat. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The first page was a name, written in neat, precise letters. Alex Bennett. He flipped through the pages, but as his eyes scanned the words, he froze. The entries were his thoughts, his memories, but they weren't right. Things he didn't remember writing. He read one passage aloud to himself, his voice quivering. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I'm losing myself. She tells me everything will be okay, but I don't trust her. I don't trust anything anymore. My memories are fading, and I can't tell what's real anymore. A cold wave of fear washed over him as he dropped the notebook. It landed with a soft thud, and the room suddenly felt suffocating. What was going on? Why did none of this feel real? Then a voice behind him, soft but unmistakable. Alex! He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. Sarah was standing in the doorway, looking at him with confusion in her eyes. What's going on? You look terrified. Alex stared at her, the words caught in his throat. He felt his pulse racing, but no sound escaped. The feeling of dread wrapped tighter around him, like an invisible hand closing in on his chest. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't escape the sense that something was horribly, irreparably wrong. The room blurred around him. Are you okay? She asked again. But Alex knew something about her, about this moment, wasn't real. His memories, his life, it was all slipping away. And the truth was starting to feel more terrifying than any nightmare. The days blurred together. Alex couldn't remember what time it was, or even how long he'd been awake. The world outside felt like a foreign place, and his apartment, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a cage. Nothing felt right, and he was beginning to question whether it ever had been. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Alex couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, twisted with doubts that gnawed at his very sense of self. He couldn't stop thinking about the notebook, the one with his name on the cover, filled with thoughts he didn't recognize, written in his own hand. I don't trust her. The words echoed in his mind as if they were calling out from the depths of a place he'd tried to forget. He couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. He had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The next morning, he left the apartment early, before Sarah could ask him questions. He couldn't face her, not yet. He couldn't look her in the eyes when he was starting to believe that the woman he loved wasn't even real. That everything, his job, his home, his memories, had been carefully constructed around him like a prison built from lies. The streets outside felt wrong. The buildings, the cars, even the air seemed out of place. He'd walked these roads 1,000 times, but today they looked like they had been painted on a canvas, shifting, distorted, as though the city itself was trying to hide something from him. He stumbled over his own feet, barely able to keep his balance. Am I dreaming, he wondered? Alex had to get to the source, to the place where his memories should have been formed, the place where he was supposed to have grown up, the place that had once felt like home. The drive to his childhood neighborhood felt like an eternity. When he finally arrived, it was late afternoon, and the familiar row of houses stood before him, just as he remembered. But as he walked down the sidewalk, something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the streets felt too empty, too quiet. He approached his old house, the one he had lived in for the first 10 years of his life. But when he reached the front gate, his breath caught in his throat. The house was completely different. The windows had been boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds, the once white picket fence now rotted and crooked. This wasn't the house he remembered. Alex's legs shook beneath him, and for a moment, he couldn't move. This can't be real. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. The memories flooded his mind. His mother standing on the porch, calling him in for dinner. His father grilling in the backyard. He remembered the sounds, the smells, the warmth of it all. But this house, this wasn't it. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed the rough texture of the fence. It wasn't wood. It was something else, something cold, like metal. It didn't belong. He turned and ran. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty streets, and with every step, he felt the walls closing in on him. He needed answers. He needed to know what was real. That night, he couldn't sleep again. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the little black notebook, his hands shaking as he opened it. He flipped through the pages, looking for something, anything that would explain the madness he was living. One entry caught his eye, and as his eyes scanned the words, his stomach twisted. I see them watching me every time I look in the mirror. They know everything about me, who I am, where I've been. I can't trust my own reflection. I don't think I ever could. Alex closed the book with a snap, his breath ragged. His mind was spiraling, the edges of his thoughts unraveling. He thought about the people he'd seen today. Emily, his childhood friend. He had visited her once, years ago, but when he found her house today, it was abandoned. Not a soul in sight. He felt like he had never truly known anyone. Like everyone he had ever loved, everyone he thought he knew, had simply disappeared. His fingers moved to his phone, dialing her number on impulse. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity, and just when he was about to hang up, the call was answered. Hello? It was Emily's voice, but it sounded wrong. The words she spoke were strange, robotic almost. She didn't sound like herself. Alex, what do you want? Emily? His voice cracked as he spoke her name. Where are you? I just saw your house, but what are you talking about? Her voice was calm, too calm. I haven't lived there in years. You're confused. No, that's not true. I remember you, us, together. His words tumbled out in a rush, desperate, pleading. I don't know you, Alex. I've never known you. The line went dead. Alex stood frozen, the phone slipping from his hand, landing with a soft thud on the table. His chest tightened. He felt like he was drowning in his own confusion, suffocating in a world that didn't fit. The next day, Alex went to his workplace. He needed to feel grounded, to feel like something was real. But as soon as he walked through the door, it hit him. His coworkers, their faces, he didn't recognize them. He couldn't remember ever seeing them before, yet they greeted him like nothing was wrong. He walked past his boss, who stopped to ask how the project was going. How's it coming, Alex? She asked with a smile. But Alex couldn't speak. He had no memory of any project. Nothing felt real. His heart was racing, and his vision blurred. He couldn't focus on anything. The noise of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the murmur of conversations, it all felt distant, like he was trapped in a dream. He rushed out of the building, desperate for air, desperate for something familiar. As he stumbled down the street, he looked up at the sky. It was a pale blue, but it felt wrong, like it was fading. A sudden thought pierced through the haze in his mind. He remembered the dream, the one that had been haunting him for days. In the dream, he wasn't Alex. He wasn't even the person he thought he was. He was someone else, someone whose face he couldn't see, but whose life was slipping through his fingers. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the more he realized, the more terrifying it became. His life, his memories, his very existence, it wasn't his at all. It was all a lie. Cliffhanger. In a final frenzied act, Alex grabbed his phone and scrolled to a photo he had taken years ago. One of him and Sarah, smiling on a beach, the sun bright behind them. He stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. The photo, it wasn't the same. The ocean was a different color. The sky, different. It was a lie. Suddenly a text message popped up on his phone from Sarah. Where are you, Alex? Are you okay? We need to talk. But Alex wasn't sure if he could trust her anymore. He wasn't even sure if he could trust himself. Alex couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, the weight of the truth pressing against his chest. He was standing in the middle of his living room, staring at the message on his phone, his mind in a spiral. "We need to talk." Talk about what? He couldn't remember the last time he'd really talked to Sarah. It felt like years, though it had only been days. He grabbed his coat, the cold metal of the door handle grounding him as he walked out, leaving his apartment behind. But where was he even going? To find the truth? Or to escape the truth that was unraveling everything around him? His thoughts were a blur. None of this is real. None of it. He stood in front of Sarah's apartment, his heart hammering in his chest. The world around him seemed to warp and twist, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. He rang the bell. No answer. He pounded on the door. "Sarah," his voice cracked. "Please, please, I need to know. What's happening to me?" The door creaked open slowly. Sarah stood there, her face unreadable, her eyes colder than he remembered. "Alex," she said, her voice soft but distant. "I don't know how to explain this anymore." He stepped back, his stomach churning. "What do you mean?" "Explain what?" "You're not who I thought you were. None of this is real. None of it." Sarah took a step toward him, her hand reaching for his, but Alex recoiled. "No, don't touch me. I don't know you. I don't know who you are." Her expression flickered, a hint of something breaking beneath the calm exterior. "You never knew me. You're not even supposed to know yourself. You've been living in a fabricated reality, Alex. You've been part of an experiment." His mind raced. "An experiment?" She nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. "They took your memories. They rewrote them. They erased everything that made you, you." Alex's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor. What are you saying?" "The truth is, Alex," she whispered, "you were never meant to remember. They created you, every memory, every feeling. It was all designed to keep you from knowing the truth." His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. He couldn't process it. "No, this can't be real. This is a lie. I'm real." Sarah's voice was tinged with grief. "You were supposed to live a normal life, happy, unaware. But something went wrong. You started to remember." Alex's breath hitched. "What am I? Who am I?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped back slowly as if preparing for something. "You're not the person you think you are, Alex. Your life, your identity, was never yours to begin with." The world began to spin, his knees giving out beneath him. He looked up at her, his vision blurring, and saw the faintest hint of tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Alex," she whispered. "I was assigned to help you, to make sure you never remembered. But now, it's too late." Alex stumbled to his feet, his mind shattering with the truth. The life he had lived, the love he had known, it was all a lie. The memories that had made him who he was, erased. As Sarah turned and walked away, Alex felt a crushing emptiness fill him. The apartment was silent. His thoughts, the ones that once felt so certain, now felt foreign, like they had never been his to claim. The room around him seemed to flicker, the edges of reality blurring. His reflection in the window wasn't his own anymore. It was someone else's face looking back at him. A stranger. And as the darkness closed in, Alex realized the terrifying truth. There was no escape. Cliffhanger. The screen faded to black, and Alex's voice echoed in the void, broken and desperate. What if the truth is worse than the lie? How?